Order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time pursuant to Committee Rule 2, House Rule 11, Clause 2. The chairman may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment for which a recorded vote is ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming to lead us in the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to notice, we call up 5082, the Revising Existing Procedures on Reporting via Technology Act, or the Report Act, for purposes of markup, and move the committee report it favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 5082 to amend.
Without objection, the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill we're here to discuss today is H.R. 5082, the Revising Existing Procedures on Reporting via Technology, or Report Act. This is a strong bipartisan bill that provides additional tools to investigate and catch offenders of child sex abuse material, or CSAM. The exploitation of children through CSAM remains a serious problem, both within the United States and abroad. We have heard about these issues extensively in our 2 victims-focused hearings in the Crime Subcommittee, one in September and one earlier this month. Reports of CSAM continue to grow exponentially, with 3,000 reports in 1998 growing to more than 1 million in 2014 and 36.2 million in 2023. We have gaps in federal law that prevent the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, from preserving reports of CSAM and hinders law enforcement from finding and holding these predators accountable. With the growing reports of CSAM on the internet, NCMEC, Homeland Security investigations, and other entities that protect children are having to make difficult decisions about which cases to prioritize. The Report Act will extend the duration for which evidence submitted to the cyber tip line is preserved from 90 days to 1 year. This will allow law enforcement agencies the much-needed time to conduct comprehensive investigations and strengthen the legal framework against online predators. This bill would strengthen already existing law that requires providers to report as soon as reasonably possible after obtaining knowledge of CSAM. Currently, many providers maintain a sufficient reporting system. The Report Act will ensure that companies who fail to meet these standards will be penalized for failure to repeatedly report exploitative content. I'd like to thank all of the advocates who helped get us where we are today, including crafting good policy and this important bill and recognizing the landscape and the tools that law enforcement need to combat this problem. This includes the American Conservative Union, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, the International Justice Mission, Rights for Girls, PACT USA, Raven, and the Tim Tebow Foundation, and so many more. They all work tirelessly to protect and advocate on behalf of victims in both the United States and abroad. I'd also like to thank my numerous Republican colleagues who joined me in support of this bill, and my colleagues across the aisle for their support of this bill, including Representative Madeline Dean, Representative Lucy McBath, Representative Glenn Ivey, and others. Finally, the law enforcement officers who tirelessly work to protect children, including Homeland Security investigations and the Internet Crimes Against Children, or ICAC, task forces across the country. Congress should aid and support them in their important work, and this act, the Report Act, does just that. It arms law enforcement with the tools they need so that all, not just some cases of child exploitation, can be prosecuted. This legislation is crucial. It is supported by law enforcement, advocacy groups, and tech companies alike. It is bipartisan, it is common sense, and it is needed. I urge my colleagues to pass the Report Act and take this important step to protect children. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important markup today, and thank you to our colleagues, Ms. Lee and Ms. Dean, for their tireless work on this legislation. The exploitation of children through the proliferation of child sex abuse material, frequently referred to as CSAM, can only be stopped with cooperation across many different sectors of American society, from law enforcement and victims groups to local leaders and technology providers. With the markup and hopefully swift floor passage of the Report Act, we can strengthen the ongoing collaboration between law enforcement and technology with providers to combat the sexual exploitation of children. This legislation would also encourage much greater reporting to the cyber tip line operated by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. The Report Act would modify how CSAM material is stored by providers, change reporting requirements for platforms, and give law enforcement more time to investigate CSAM cases. By making these changes to the law, the Report Act will help law enforcement evolve with the threat as consumption of CSAM moves into new technological spaces. Advancements in technology, from generative AI to social networking platforms, have had clear benefits to our society. For example, cutting-edge medical and therapeutic breakthroughs are increasingly frequent. We can keep in touch with loved ones from far away, and budding entrepreneurs and artists are able to take advantage of available technologies to get up and running without costly barriers to entry, to name just a few. Excuse me. But there is also a darker side. Law enforcement experts and victims advocates agree. Advancements in technology have also led to an explosion of CSAM available and distributed online. Horrific photographs and videos depicting depraved acts against children are now increasingly readily available through virtually every internet-based technology, including social networking platforms, file-sharing sites, gaming devices, and mobile apps. And demand for new and more egregious images and videos drives the market for this material, resulting in the continued abuse and exploitation of children. Through their comprehensive efforts, the Internet Crimes Against Children, or ISAC task forces, which represent over 5,400 local, state, and federal law enforcement and prosecutorial agencies, are making significant strides in identifying and rescuing victims of child sex abuse material. But the growth of the problem continues to outpace the resources available to identify and locate victims, especially since law enforcement prosecutors, the tech industry, and other organizations must continually contend with the emergence of new technologies like artificial intelligence, which further complicates their efforts. Under the process for reporting CSAM today, electronic service providers or companies that offer a technology platform through which users can communicate are required to report instances of child sexual abuse material to the cyber tip line. After a tip is reported, the company works with NCMEC to share relevant information during the provider's data retention window, which is generally quite limited. NCMEC reviews incoming reports and then refers them out to the appropriate law enforcement agency, typically a regional ICAC task force. To date, NCMEC reports that the cyber tip line has received more than 92 million reports, the majority of them from electronic communication service providers. Its Child Victim Identification Program has reviewed over 331 million images and videos, reviewing more than 25 million images annually. While most of the children reflected in the images remain unknown, over 19,300 victims have been identified. We should certainly commend the successes of NCMEC and other law enforcement agencies in identifying and rescuing victims, but we cannot be satisfied while so many CSAM victims remain unidentified. That is why the Report Act is an important first step to increasing the effectiveness of CSAM reporting and protecting victims from future abuse. The Report Act increases the amount of time a communications provider can retain suspected CSAM content and corresponding data. In doing so, it will give law enforcement more time to investigate cases and thereby to request follow-up information after the data retention window would normally have closed. I'm also pleased that the bill adds child trafficking to the list of required disclosures to the cyber tip line and makes changes to protect the victims who report their own cases of abuse. While I expect that this bill will garner broad bipartisan support, I am disappointed that we did not hold a hearing on the legislation itself with the opportunity to talk with NCMEC to ensure that we are making all of the changes needed to help protect victims of child abuse. A hearing can also help establish a strong record and pave the way for other bills that build upon this legislation. Finally, I would be remiss if I failed to mention the importance of congressional funding to those agencies and organizations charged with identifying, locating, and rescuing these children. The collaborative efforts of federal, local, and state law enforcement agencies, along with private institutions and nonprofits, supported by federal funding and grant programs, are instrumental in identifying and rescuing victims of child sexual abuse material, as well as bringing offenders to justice and providing essential support to victims of sexual exploitation. The Senate has already passed a version of this legislation with the support of law enforcement groups, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, and technology providers. I hope that we will follow suit in short order and send the bill to the President. I urge members to support the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to
Without
HR.
objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered base text for the purpose of the amendment. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment makes changes to prevent any data security threats when the reports are stored in the cloud by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, then transferred electronically to law enforcement. The goal is to make sure we are adequately protecting the data. The changes in this amendment, 1, secure the data in accordance with industry and government standards for cybersecurity. 2, requires NCMEC to undergo an annual independent cybersecurity audit to look for any gaps in their data security protections. And 3, assures that NCMEC properly addresses all issues the audit identifies. NCMEC agrees to all of these changes. This addition was heavily negotiated and ultimately supported by both Democrats and Republicans in the Democrat-controlled Senate. In our last subcommittee hearing on child sex abuse material, Chairman Biggs emphasized that he wanted to pass the Report Act in as close to perfect form as possible, and this amendment accomplishes that goal. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? We'll start here, and I think we'll come there. So the gentleman from Arizona is recognized, and we'll go to Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the sponsors of the bill working hard to give us a bill that's as close to perfect condition as possible right now, and I support the ANS and the underlying bill, as does NCMEC. And I would just remind everybody that actually we had 2 hearings on this topic. Actually, the ranking member was at it just about a week or so ago and was able to attend. I support the bill and encourage everyone to do the same. Vote yes. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Before recognizing the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, where the chair is pleased to recognize the former chairman of the committee, the good friend and gentleman from the great state of Texas, Mr. Smith, who chaired this committee a few years ago. Welcome. I know you care about all the bills, but one in particular. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania, co-sponsored the legislation, a prime co-sponsor, is recognized.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and especially thank you, Representative Lee, for all your work on this important bill. I rise in support of H.R. 5082, the Report Act. Think about it. In a 2023 report on child sexual abuse, NCMEC reported a 329% increase in child sexual abuse files reported to its cyber tip line over a 5-year period. And NCMEC received more than 88 million child sexual abuse files in 2022 alone. Each one of these photos, videos, live streams represents the underlying record of a child's very worst experiences. With this terrible content on the rise, we must act swiftly to protect children. The Report Act, simplified, does 2 important things. Number 1, it requires websites and social media platforms to report sex trafficking of children and enticement crimes. And number 2, it would also increase penalties for failing to report this terrible exploitative content. The bill also makes several much-needed improvements to help NCMEC and law enforcement better address these horrific violations. As the ranking member said, and as we heard in hearings here, we must also, in addition to strengthening through the Report Act, we must put the resources toward protecting children, identifying more of the victims, and protecting children. And with that, I am pleased to be a co-sponsor of Report, and I thank Representative Lee, all the bipartisan support that we have from the Republicans and the Democrats. For those who say Democrats and Republicans can't get anything done together, I'm so proud that we are recognizing the need to protect our children. Thank you, Representative Lee, for your leadership on this bipartisan issue. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. Let me thank the Chairman and Ranking Member of the full committee, and Ms. Lee for her leadership, my counterpart on the Crime Subcommittee, and Ms. Dean for her commitment and leadership on this issue. H.R. 5082, the Report Act, would amend federal law governing the reporting of suspected child sexual exploitation and abuse offenses online. More specifically, the bill would make several improvements to the cyber tip line operated by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, an organization that many of us have worked with for many, many years, such as adding child sex trafficking and coercion and enticement of children to the list of crimes websites and social media platforms might report, increasing penalties for failure to report content, and increasing the time evidence must be preserved by websites and social media platforms after it has been submitted to the cyber tip line. These changes are necessary to address the exponential growth of crimes committed against children online. Children are among our society's most precious and most vulnerable. While much progress has been made in preventing and investigating crimes against children, as well as prosecuting the offenders, there is still much more to be done. As a society, we continue to struggle with the existence of child exploitation, particularly online. The internet and digital services have become some of the most useful tools for child predators. In 2013, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, also known as NCMEC, received less than 1,400 cyber tips each day. In a span of only 10 years, the number of tips received each day has risen to 100,000. Under existing federal law, the electronic service providers are required to report apparent violations of certain child sexual exploitation laws found on their platforms. Currently, violations of 6 specific child sexual exploitation laws, including child sexual abuse material, also known as CSAM, are subject to the reporting requirement. Reports are made to the cyber tip line, a hotline run by NCMEC, which then transmits these reports to the appropriate law enforcement. Pursuant to this clearinghouse function, NCMEC is generally immune from liability for the possession and transmission of CSAM that would otherwise be illegal. After making a cyber tip line report, providers must preserve the reported content for 90 days before deleting it. And due to rapid change in technology, online child exploitation offenses are increasing in scale. And so this amendment and addition to this legislation takes this a long way. Although reporting from law enforcement, child advocates, and child protection organizations show that child sex trafficking and online coercion and enticement are on the rise, these crimes are currently not subject to federal reporting requirements. The Report Act would add these reprehensible crimes to the reporting obligations of service providers. To ensure providers take this responsibility seriously, the bill would increase the penalties for the knowing and willful range to report from a range of $150,000 to $300,000 to a range from $600,000 to $1 million, depending on the size of the provider and whether the provider is a repeat offender. This is clearly an important effort and opportunity to do better by our children. While I'm on this case, let me remind my colleagues of the work we still have to do, which is H.R. 30, the Bipartisan Stop Human Trafficking in School Zones, introduced by Michael McCall, myself, and Representative Nadler. And this particularly focuses on online, but as well it has the aspect of dealing with the physical enticement and recruitment of children right out of their classroom, right by classmates. And so this legislation would establish a sentencing enhancement of up to 5 years for any person who commits human trafficking offenses and other sex offenses. We can do always more, and I applaud the Report Act and look forward to my colleagues joining me in working on H.R. 30 as well, specifically dealing with human trafficking. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I too would like to acknowledge, and he may have gone, but my former chairman and fellow Texan, Chairman Smith. It's good to see you. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Maryland is recognized. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. McBath was in the queue first. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you so much, Chairman Jordan and Ranking Member Nadler, and I'm just so excited. Thank you to Representative Lee. Thank you very, very much for asking me to participate in this really important piece of legislation, because above all else, I'm just a mom, which is why I speak today in support of the Report Act. What else is as precious as our children? The love that we feel for our children is deeper than any that I've ever known, and I'm sure any parent in here feels exactly the same way. And even if we lose our children, as I have, that love lives on in us and pulls us to do our very best to keep our children and other children safe. The legislation before us today will be implemented to support child victims, help law enforcement bring missing children home, and protect our future generations from these horrors. I saw the need for stronger laws to eliminate the spread of child sexual abuse material, so I introduced the End Child Exploitation Act. My bill empowers our law enforcement to conduct comprehensive, thorough investigations without their evidence being prematurely thrown out. And I am proud to say that my bill is included in the piece of legislation that we are discussing today, along with other important guidelines that support our law enforcement to find these children and to prosecute their abusers. It's a dangerous reality that inappropriate, disgusting material can be shared across the globe, while those uploading and recording the material can easily disappear. Our children are at risk. Just last week, a story published in the Washington Post explained the turmoil of a young 14-year-old girl and what she experienced after she was coerced and exploited by an online group of predators into sending and live streaming explicit material. Sadly, this is all too common and happening every single day on our social media applications and websites that are readily made available to our children. This is exactly why the Report Act is so sorely needed and why I am so very proud to support it. We must take care of our most precious resource, and that is our children. They are our future. And as parents and our community leaders, members of Congress, we must do everything that we can to protect and support and uplift them. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to associate myself with the remarks of my colleagues who've come before. I certainly want to take a moment to strongly support this piece of legislation. I want to commend my fellow former prosecutor, Ms. Lee, for her outstanding leadership in this legislative effort, and also Ms. Dean, who I think has been doing a great job on this front. I want to thank Ms. McBath for her leadership and allowing me to join in the provision that's been included in this bill, Section 3. Chairman, I want to thank you for bringing this bill forward. And with that, I know you'll be surprised that I'm this brief, Mr. Chairman, but I want to thank my colleagues, urge them to support this bill, and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted, a reporting quorum being present. The question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. I was looking around to make sure there's a quorum present. When we do have that. All those in favor say aye. 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 Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported. The request for recorded votes, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Massey votes aye. Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Ms. Sparks? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Bentz? Mr. Klein? Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes yes. Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Yes. Ms. Hageman votes yes. Mr. Moran? Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes aye. Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Schiff? Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes aye. Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy?
Aye.
Mr. Ivy votes aye. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye.
You okay? Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates votes aye.
I think we need two more. I think we need two more. Did Ms. Ballant vote? Has she voted? She voted, okay. Gentlelady from Texas.
Ms. Escobar votes yes. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes yes.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 23 ayes and 0 noes.
The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have